Now, this week, a court here in Paris is examining a terrorism case that took over 40 years to bring to trial, the bombing of the Copernic Street synagogue in which 4 people were killed. Now, the case has been a challenge for 21st century investigators with no DNA or mobile phone records to work with. Joining me to discuss the case is France 24's Shirli Sitbon. And Shirli, first of all, what kind of challenges then have investigators and the court faced in finally getting this to trial?
Well, the first challenge maybe is the fact that so much of the evidence was thrown out in 1980 because the techniques were not the same. Today we have DNA, did not exist at the time. Of course it existed, but they did not know how to use it to identify suspects. Today we know that only identical twins have the same DNA, and that is used to know with certainty if a suspect is guilty or if somebody can be exonerated of a crime. So here we have some images of techniques used today. There's not only DNA, there are many other techniques. Of course, often in terrorism cases, there's the phone tracking. Suspects, usually they are tracked. And in courts, you hear the accusation saying, this is where you were at that time. And basically, it allows people to recreate all of the timetable and to know what happened exactly, where the suspects were. It did not exist at the time. And the judge who took over the case, the investigating judge, Marc Trévidic, in the 2000s, said he felt like he was traveling back in time. Forget about the tools he's used to. Now there was just basically fingerprints, police sketches. So what happened at the time was that police at the site, they found a crater. Inside the crater, there was this motorcycle, and they realized that the bomb was placed on the motorcycle. They found the importer of the motorcycle. They found the shop where it was bought, and then the hotel where the person who purchased the motorcycle stayed. They managed to find witnesses who described this man, the suspect, as this person. They had the features, but the man they did not know who he was. And of course, witnesses could not identify anyone because there was no suspect to identify. And we heard them in court just a few days ago saying, well, this was 43 years ago. We just saw him for a few minutes. We can't say this is this man 43 years later. So basically, all of the evidence is really old, and that's a really big complication.
Indeed, Shirley, and I know you've been looking at this case quite closely and listening to various experts on this. One thing that you've learned is that handwriting analysis needs to be treated with some caution.
Yes, there were 4 different expertises, analysis that were made in this case. And because this is something that was filled out by the alleged killer at the time, 5 words when he checked into his hotel. And this was compared to the suspect's handwriting. But of course, it's only 5 words in capital letters. It's really complicated to check. Of course, all of those, the experts who worked on this, they say that it could be the same man, but that's not really enough evidence. There are many techniques used. It's a lot of work. It took many months for these experts. They use various pastes to actually determine the pressure the person applies on the sheet of paper. They compare what the paper is on, what pen is used. So it's a lot of work. It's a real science, but it's not enough. And there is something else in this case. Another difficulty is that in the early 1980s, and we've discovered this a few years ago and was confirmed in court this week, various European countries, they just wanted to stop terrorist attacks from happening in their countries. So they had these pacts with terror groups saying, don't attack us, attack our neighbors. And Yves Bonnet, the head of French Interior Intelligence, he said, I had this kind of pact. And this is an article, and he told a judge that he was fine with terrorists attacking Italy because that's not in France. So that was the approach at the time. And that's why various European countries kept evidence. And Italy had a piece of evidence, and basically it released it. And the judge, Marc Trévidic, said that Italy probably had the same pacts as France did, and that it just let the terrorists go and saying, just don't attack Italy. Go. We don't want to see you anymore. You're fine.
Wow. And so clearly much has changed since 1980, Shirley, in the way that police investigate these cases, but also in the way that we treat victims of crimes like this. You know, in 1980, for example, there were no psychologists to talk to those who had survived the attack. And actually, now that this case is finally coming to trial, the prosecution has apologized for the fact that that never happened.
Yes, it did. The prosecutor told the victims who were there, a few victims who were there, that the system has completely changed. At the time, we heard various witnesses saying they left the site because police told them, leave fast. We need to work. Get out of here, basically. And nobody ever talked to them after that. Of course, those who were wounded were treated, but 4 people were killed in the attack. But all of those who were traumatized were just left alone. And even their relatives and people around them say, well, move on. Life goes on. Why are you complaining? What's your problem? Why are you depressed? Well, we've heard stories like that in court with people at last telling their story, even 43 years later, and crying in court saying, I know I wasn't wounded, but I was traumatized. And it's actually a feeling they've been heard at last after all of these years. It was a real change, and it was important to hear from the justice system itself that the system has changed.
Shirli Sitbon, thanks very much.